What's good, my Final Fantasy peasants? How you all doing? So let's talk Final Fantasy 16. Now I know that this might seem like a crazy video to do because this motherfucker here, this could be 2022, this would probably be PS5 era, this could be way off, or this could never happen. But I highly think it will based on Final Fantasy 15's performance. But the reason I said this, I would do this video, and a lot of people want to see it, is if having a YouTube channel and going through the development of Final Fantasy 15, back from Versus 13 days and playing the game, if it's taught me one thing, it's what Final Fantasy fans want. I've spoken to thousands of people on a daily, I've had discussions with people, and I can really see the hopes and dreams of what people want in their next Final Fantasy. So I thought I'd present it in a video. Let me know if you agree. I've even held some polls on it. Of course, we're not all going to agree on this topic, but this is just what I think the fans as a majority want and where Square Enix should go next. So buckle up, you're going to need a seatbelt. Let's go! So I'm going to start by talking about Versus 13. Oh god, Stella did look dope. And this did look, all in all, very, very dope. Now, oh god. And I think with the Versus 13 project, and the reason I'm talking about this in this video is the Versus 13 project really showed me, I'm going to have to pause that by the way, that actually copywriting all of Versus 13 content, so I can't play longer than 30 seconds for you. But the thing with Versus 13 is we knew enough to be intrigued, and we certainly did. We'd seen combat, we'd seen concepts, we'd seen character models, and we could identify some basic plot devices. And I'm not one of these people who says, no, you can't be interested in Versus 13, you're just an idiot, you knew nothing about it. But then I'm also not in the camp of Versus 13 was better than 15, and Tabata ruined Nomura's vision, and Nomura's game would have been so much better. Versus 13 remake, I'm also not in that camp. I think that's two huge extremes, and both of them are pretty naive. Both of them are pretty, come on, get the fuck over it. You didn't know enough to be that interested, and you did know enough to be kind of interested. But the reason I bring up the Versus 13 project for this video is it was a projection. I think so many fans are still obsessed with Versus 13 because you could project onto it whatever your hopes and desires for Final Fantasy were. And I think that's really what Versus 13 did personify. It personified all the base concepts that we are interested in, that we want. It had complexity to it. It had a romance, the whole thing with Stella versus Noctis, heavily romance-centered theme to it, but that was covered in tragedy. And then there was all that goes in with the dark themes. There was tragedy, there was betrayal, there was death. It had the eyes that see the light of waning souls, basing it on Hamlet, and there was everything with it being a perpetual night, and there was a lot that you could take from those trailers and certainly be very interested in. And you'll see the poll. So I hosted a poll, and pretty much every result that came through was what Versus 13. So you're really going to see what I'm talking about. Round up, need as many votes as possible. So basically, what do you want to see in FF16? And I had nearly 300 people come through. So that's a good representation across all demographics. And this was it. So these were the options. Let me zoom on in. Coming in as a huge winner, and this gives me so much joy to say, complex story and plot devices. That came in. I am so proud of my Final Fantasy fans, with a more understandable and grounded story only getting 37. So a vast majority do like the complexity, and I got to say I was kind of surprised. I thought it would win, but not by this kind of margin, because we know that there were so many people who complained about FF13. Far too complex. It was the same even with this 15 installment, too complex. And I understand that there are some people who say complex, there are some people who just say convoluted, and some of the Final Fantasies can become convoluted if, say, parts of the story in the data log. And I will concede FF13 did have a bit too much in the data log, and FF15 had too much hidden in obscurity, where the only way you could know this story was watching some twats like me on YouTube spouting about a fucking theory. So I definitely see the difference between complex and just ill explained and ill portrayed. But It's good to see that there are lots of fans who still like complex story and plot devices, because that is the J&J RPG, and that was the thing I was worried about. So that came in at number 1. Then coming in at number 2 was a darker and grittier FF, and with, where's the other one? An upbeat and happier FF just at the bottom. Really not scoring that well. So we do want that dark, we do want that grit, and that was everything that Versus 13 did have. Not even in just what we saw, but even as the rumours have come out. I know I've explained about how Noctis was supposedly thought he'd killed Stella, he was the only one who was going to see her. The Star Scourge was coming from the moon, and that was going to turn people violent and aggressive, and they became more monstrous. Then they would, when they got dark enough, their souls would get sucked into the void, just ripped out of their arsehole, sucked into the void, demons would take over, they'd forget their loved ones, and it was dark. There was a lot of dark, and that's what had people so excited about Versus 13, is not only did it seem dark on a story level from what we did see, you know, 2 star-crossed lovers having to fight one another because they're on opposing families, but even just the look of it, everything was dark. Insomnia was permanently dark. FF16, don't be scared to go full dark, because FF15 did go dark. I mean, I'm not going to say anything for spoilers, but we know what happened in there. It was pretty dark, but go even further, Square Enix, because I think that's what fans are looking for. Now, this was very interesting. Wide linearity. FF16 should have wide linearity. Now, this didn't win by that much. I mean, you've got open world at 60 here, but the reason why I said wide linearity, this is pretty key, is I don't think Square Enix should go linear if it's going to be too confined and too constricted. So I think we've learnt enough now that enough people didn't like 13, enough people complained about 10, even though 10 was able to disguise it in a phenomenal story and just an incredibly cultured, well fleshed out world. But people feel too confined in corridors that are, you know, your character's as big as me, and I can't fucking... You know what I'm saying, guys? You know how linear that shit was, and it can feel a bit constricted. You know, you feel a bit sandwiched in. But the thing is, that's not the only option for linearity, and this is why I wanted to say wide linearity. We have seen enough with things like 13.2 with Lightning Returns, where the linearity is wide, and even with FF7, FF8 and FF9 and all the older FFs, they're wide linearity. You know, again, I've got to reiterate, you can't think of a return function on an airship as making it open world. That doesn't do it. So I think a lot of Final Fantasy fans who are voting here, they know that. And the reason why they're voting wide linearity, some people might be watching this and going, why wouldn't you want open world? Open world is so much better. Because people are voting wide linearity, they understand what that comes with. They understand that with wide linearity, the development and the technical challenge is not even a fraction that of open world. Open world is so difficult to accomplish, and that does take away from things. Fans have identified enough that things take away from other things, and they've just identified that in linearity you are going to get a linear story. You are going to get an immersive deep story that does tell a consistent story throughout. And it builds up to plot device, and as it builds up its emotion, and it paces itself in a way that just makes the entire experience just... Whereas open world doesn't do that. Open world, as we all know, it's designed to be put down for 20-30 hours. Now, you could hop on the story, and if you've got open world, the developer has to design it in a way where at this point you could go off for 20-30 hours, shove your thumb up your ass, and then come back to the story. And they have to kind of build the story in a jump on and jump off kind of way. Now, I know people are going to come out and say, Dragon Age, it's a great story. No, I've played Dragon Age and it has a very jump on and jump off story. Nothing in an open world environment has ever been as deep and immersive in its story as what some of the linearity games, especially Final Fantasies, has been. So there's that anyway. Now the next is kind of a bit closer again, so slightly more romance centered Final Fantasy over a slightly more friendship centered. So we want the romance, and I think we know we want the romance. Your best Final Fantasies have always been when there's been romance involved, and I think when we're saying slightly more romance centered, we're talking more than 15. Square Enix, this is a message to you. You had the entire thing with Noctis and Luna, but it wasn't romantic enough. Let me assure you that Final Fantasy 15 would have an entire extra point. I'm talking 1 point. If you'd have given Noctis and Luna a date. I think there was a picture, I don't know if I can find it, there was a picture on the internet of Luna and Noctis going out at night and going up into the mountains, and Noctis was helping her down the rocks and taking her hand, and it just looked so beautiful. And if you'd have given us that scene, that would have been enough, and that would have invested our emotions when Luna, I'm not going to say anything for spoilers, but we know what happened. Fuck it, she died! I'm going to have to put spoilers in the title now, fuck. So yeah, she died, okay? And if you'd have just given us even one night and half an hour of extra cutscenes invested in Noctis and Luna, trust me, this game would have got a whole extra point by a lot of the fan base, because romance has always been a central piece. Now, I'm going to say, guys, I'm going to chip in, I think we can all agree that there are certain games and certain characters who romance just doesn't work for. So I don't think there's really that many people at all who's going to come out here and say that Lightning needed a boyfriend and her entire story needed to be romance centered. That would have felt wrong to me. Personally, I think, no. And then even if I just go to the FF16, you know who doesn't look like they need a partner? Agni doesn't look like she needs it. She doesn't look like she needs... Honestly, I keep saying, what should FF16 be? I keep saying this. This looks dope. It has dragons, it has crystals, it has a old religious style cultist kind of story going on. Agni looks dope. She looks like she'd be a solid protagonist. And then it's even got the slums, and that kind of feels a bit FF12Z / FF7Z. There's an eclipse going on, so you've got the old hoodoo, voodoo, astrological effects, which is classic Final Fantasy. She's grasping onto some crystal. Just looks like a solid fucking game. But this woman does not look like she needs a romance to carry the game. And there are certain other Final Fantasy characters who I felt that with. So Bart's, I don't think Bart's really needed one. That all said, when we look at things like Final Fantasy X, I mean, look at that. Look at that. That should be FF16. That looks super dope. An imperial, magical capital, slums, dragons, Agni, dope. I want you to make that FF16. But if we look at something like Final Fantasy X, how heavily romance-centered that was and how popular a game that was. People loved FF10, and FF10 did incredibly well. And I understand there are some people who might not want their Final Fantasies that heavily romance-centered, but I think a lot of people do. So I honestly think with FF16, if you're going to do Agni, perhaps dodge it, or perhaps... I don't know enough about Agni at the end of the day. I'm just vapidly basing that on she looks like she doesn't really need a bloke. But fuck it, we like romance. We do. We like ships. And if the game doesn't have enough ships, guess what we'll do? We'll make up ships. So I'm sorry to say, Noctis and Luna, it was a beautiful ship, yeah, but it wasn't fulfilling enough. And now that's why you now have people, making up Ignis and Arania ships. People like their ships. And again, versus 13. Noctis versus Stella. Tragic star-crossed lovers. It just looked beautiful. And we liked that. And that's even why, not even just, I preferred versus 13 over 15. You've got some people saying, I preferred Stella over Luna. And it's a projection of versus 13 was going to be more of a romantic game. And it was going to have some more romantic hardships, just like Yuna and Tidus. And all of the difficulties they went through. So people really want that. So I really think that's the way you should go with FF16. But again, I'm not saying this to dismiss other people's opinions. When I say we want complex stories and romance, not to dismiss the people who didn't vote for that, but I'm just saying this is what the majority of fans want. So come on, Square, come on, give it to us. Finally, and this is where I voted different to what came through, so I personally voted further evolved turn-based combat. And of course I say further evolved because there's no point in even considering, I want the turn-based from FF7 or FF8 or FF9, far too slow-paced, and things have to move forward. So I don't think turn-based should ever go back to what it was. But what I was saying in an earlier stream is between FF10-2 and FF13. And I don't care what you say about FF13, the stagger system and certain core elements in that combat system were very, very ingenious. And it was really building up the pacing to turn-based to a pace that was engaging and exciting even for gamers today. Games have become so explosive and fast-paced, and turn-based was always going to struggle to keep up with that kind of pacing. You had things like the trigger happy, the things that just kept you engaged, so there wasn't a lot of downtime. And everything with job classes and free moving positions and glitzing it up with the outfits. And then FF13 really did keep you constantly in the action. So I think between those, turn-based was moving somewhere, and if you'd have continued, if you'd given it one more stab, I think you could have really made something. But for anyone who is saying that turn-based could never return, I have a little quote for you that I'll show you in a minute. But I can respect that a lot of people are now over turn-based. By looks of it, the majority are saying further evolved action combat. And I can understand why some people are saying, turn-based, that's over. I think there's no right or wrongs here, but a lot of people have asked, Peasant, what would you want as a turn-based combat system? And I've struggled to explain this, but FF16, in my opinion, and where Final Fantasy should go, it should be kind of like 15, but not. So what I mean by that is with 15 you had Noctis and it was action combat, and you had a very tenuous grasp on the other three characters, and it was tenuous to the point it was actually frustrating. It was kind of frustrating to be trying to control Ignis, Gladiolus and Prompto in the background, and what they were essentially trying to do there is what my vision is. You had the other three characters who you could kind of control in a strategic manner while being action combat. But I kind of feel it was too clunky, and this is why I've always said, imagine you had a regimented action turn-based combat line, or just your traditional turn-based, and you can action your strategic commands like you would do in the old days, and once you'd action your commands, you'd have to sit there with your thumb up your arse and wait for them to all cast it. So you'd have 4 characters and then all go off and cast your moves, and you're just sat there just waiting for it to happen. A lot of downtime. Well, in that downtime, why not give us an option to go in with one of those characters? So we could go traditional turn-based, action our commands, and then pick up a character and go in and have some hacks and slashes and jumps and flips and this combo, that combo, in the downtime. And it would be action and turn-based in one game. Like I said, I kind of feel like they went for that with 15, but didn't quite get there. The other idea I've had is like Type 0. I think 7 Remake should have a quick switch function, so you can just switch in with Tifa, Red, Barret, Cloud at any moment and just wail in on traditional action combat. So there it is, guys. Kingdom Heartsy is kind of how I feel like 7 Remake's going. They've said KH mixed in with Dissidia-esque. Now, I can't understand the Dissidia-esque style, but the fact that they've got Nomura and what's the name of the guy? Is it Takahashi who did Dissidia? I can't remember. I probably pulled that name out my arse, but those are the 2 guys working on it. The guy who did Dissidia's combat, and we've got Nomura, who obviously did KH, and that's why I think 7 Remake's going to be a blend of those 2 ideas. But going on to that quote that I spoke about, because with the combat, and this is why I don't think it could be gone. Here's even a quote from Hashimoto himself on Final Fantasy 16. So he says that with FF15, Square Enix was able to fuse a setting in modern and fantasy world in one. And they kind of really did. It had that medieval style to it. So it had the old kind of, we have kingdoms, we use medieval weapons. They even had the Tenebrae Knights in old knight's armour. And it did have a modern medieval kind of style to it. And I liked that. But a lot of people said it felt a bit close to 13, so it was very modern. And I'd say that between 13 and 15, the style flip up wasn't that dramatic, or not as dramatic it has been. And I think that's what Final Fantasy fans want. I think this is what FF16 should be. I think we like dramatic. We like the changes from 7, 8 and 9. They were so vast and so crazy. And then you even just 9 to 10, and you had the old Bali Indonesia style. We love that, and that's why I think 16, if it does anything, it has to be unique and it has to be a real big flip up, and this gives me confidence because Hashimoto, he gets this. So that said, it doesn't mean we'll necessarily see a modern setting again for FF16. Hashimoto says that they haven't made anything for Final Fantasy 16 yet. Nothing. But to keep in mind that just because FF15 has certain setting, it doesn't mean the next one will follow in the same way. He emphasises the differences we've seen in main numbered Final Fantasies by using 7, 8 and 9 as examples, just like I did, on how we saw it go from very steampunk cyber and then back for a more Final Fantasy world in 9. He says that this is something directors might do on purpose to change things up for the series. So that's great. We like change-ups, and that's one of the most important things for 16. And all I'll say is, when I spoke heavily on the combat. I don't even think combat's that important for us Final Fantasy fans. Again, it's nice to talk about it, but I think I speak for a lot of people. I've done the polls. People place combat very low on their priority. The thing is in your world, in your culture, in your story, and in your characters. So I think that's the most important thing. And it's good to know that you want to flip things up. So as far as the battle system goes though, this is also something that is decided by the director. So it doesn't necessarily mean that 16 will be on the action RPG side as we've seen with 15. Woo! Woo! Wow. So it might not be action RPG. I think there's so many people like, yep, turn-based is just now gone. It'd be really nice to see them go for a different combat style, I think. But that's just because I suck at action RPGs. Let me know, do you want an action RPG again? Hashimoto says that when they start or work on a new Final Fantasy, they set the bar to make the ultimate fantasy of the generation with each installment. So if a director feels that his certain battle system would work better in the current generation, that's the main battle system they'll run with. Now, I don't like that quote, and I've already explained why. You saw the J in JRPG. I've showed you who the current generation are. I've showed you who the current gen of gamers are. I've showed you what they have voted is their interests. So short storyline campaigns, open world, explosive combat, and kind of pretty much all the things they did with 15. The current generation isn't Japanese gamers anymore. From 5, 6 or even 10 years ago. They're now pretty much under 18-year-olds. Remember, a third of all gamers are under 18. 18-year-old gamers in the West. And that's what it means. When they're saying they are trying to cater each Final Fantasy to the current generation and make it the ultimate fantasy of that generation, well, I'm afraid to say that this generation is as far detached from a classic Final Fantasy as we can be. It really is the case. Honestly, don't take this as what I think a lot of people would vote for now. This is the hardcore Final Fantasy fan base. I have to point this out. If I was to host this poll on a generic website, I really think it would be different. I don't think complex story and plot devices would be winning by this heavy a margin. I think dark and gritty would still win. I think we all like our dark and grit. Open world would win 100%, and action combat would still be winning. So all of that aside, I do think even if an 18-year-old today, and by the way, I mean this as no disrespect to an 18-year-old. I know that there are going to be some 18-year-olds watching this channel now, and you do love JRPGs, and you do love retro games, and you're not this vapid kind of, I just want more explosive combat, and I just want it to be crazy. I know you're not all like that, and I'm generalising, but just as a majority as a whole, I wouldn't even blame 18-year-olds for not being able to have a love for JRPGs or turn-based combat. You've not really had the opportunity for it, or they've not. But we're all smart enough to know what the deal is. We know what I'm talking about. So what should Final Fantasy 16 do? Well, if it showed me anything, go dark, go gritty, go heavy, go hard. Don't be a pussy. Do not be a pussy. That is the main thing. It has to be out there, it has to be bold and adventurous. So like with 7 Remake, the only way that bad boy is going to flop and piss people off, if you're going to do the cross-dressing. You've said you're going to do the cross-dressing, but are you going to do the honeybee in? And are you going to do the kind of black fringe on kind of being offensive Barrett jokes and his kind of stereotype? Are you going to do the Don Corneo kind of implying rape and Cloud trying to get raped in the dungeon? No, there was some really heavy plot devices, and the thing is, if you cut those, and that's why when I said about Luna, that rumour that they cut stuff with her out, and things like her being abused as a child, people are like, no, No, that's terrible. I want to see those scenes. When I did that video, people came out in their waves saying they want to see it. So it really shows something about the Final Fantasy fan base. Is they want you to go heavy with the themes. Do not give a fuck about the age rating, honestly. Make the next one 16, make it 18. I'm sorry if you're 16 or 17 and you want it. Even make it 18. Because we want a dark and gritty Final Fantasy. Go for wide linearity, but regardless of what you go with, the main takeaway message there between open world and wide linearity, we don't give a flying fuck. As long as you do the world in a way that we can see the culture and we can see the world and we can experience it and feel it, but also get a 40-hour mainline campaign. We don't give a fuck about the format of the world. The story is just the most important thing, and that's what I take away from that result there. Go for action combat if you want, but honestly try what I suggested. Let me know, guys, what do you think about my suggestion for turn-based? A mix, a collaboration of turn-based and action in one. Don't be afraid to go complex. I mean, go as complex as hell. We do like a good brain teaser. Just make sure that everything in that complexity you can actually find in the game. And as much as I'm not going to be one of the people who say, oh, no, there shouldn't have been a movie. There shouldn't have been Kingsglaive for 15. You shouldn't have to watch a free, super detailed CGI movie. Oh, I'm such a victim. You made me watch a free CGI movie. Come on, guys. I'm not going to fucking feel sorry for anyone that you had to watch a damn good movie on the internet before playing 15. But that being said, yes, I do think that almost everything should be self-contained in the game. And that's the thing, even though there was a movie and there was a Brotherhood, that was just supplementary material to improve your experience. You actually didn't really need either of those. So many people say you needed Kingsglaive and Brotherhood for the game to make sense. You really didn't. You really didn't. But how do I feel about needing stuff like that? And it's the same with data logs. Keep it to a minimum. As much as I don't have empathy for people who complain that they had to watch a fucking CGI movie before a game, I think there's been enough complaints with the data logs and that, and having to go off and read and interpret Genesis artwork. I think the next installment should be 100% self-contained. Just keep it self-contained, keep everything explained. And honestly, you can use NPCs and radios way more to your advantage to do that. Like you did with 15. You had a lot of very important plot points in the radio, but honestly those radios were pretty bloody hidden in the towns. So just find, you can still do the story through NPCs and other smaller medial routes rather than cutscenes, because they are pretty intense to do, but make them obvious and just make it so that we can't miss crucial elements of the story, like Type 0. You can miss loads of it and you'd be fucked, and the story would make no sense. So avoid that in the future. And then also finally, feel free to romance us up and give us those shipping feels. But Square Enix, if you ever watch this, I hope you take away these points. Do you agree with them? Do you disagree with them? Guys, let me know what you think. What do you really want for 16? I was going to go a lot deeper and even come up with some ideas for 16. I've definitely got some. Honestly, I have. But number one message, flesh it out. If there's one thing I've identified in Final Fantasy fans, in the thousands I talk to every day and the messages I read every day, is it has to be fleshed out. It doesn't matter what you do, just make sure it's fleshed out. Honestly, with Final Fantasy fans, you can't flesh it out enough. However much fleshing you think you have done, Square, times it by 10. And then flesh it some more. Flesh! Why am I saying flesh? We like our stories to be explained on the next level kind of depth. And my channel's taught me this. Perhaps because everyone on this Facebook is a follower of mine, and of course I do the theories, and I'll do half an hour theory, and I'll talk about Ifrit and Eos, and I'll talk about why the FF15 logo is going to represent both Luna and Noctis, and go into some serious depth. So yeah, I understand that everyone following this channel really does like the depth of the story, and they don't like being cock-teased with little things or not having it fully explained to them. And honestly, we don't want to make things up in our head. That's one thing I've definitely learned, is now at the end of Final Fantasy 15, where you left it open whether the bros could die or not, and you kind of said, yeah, this is up to interpretation on whether they did or not. No, we don't want that. We don't want it. We don't want to make shit up in our head, which is funny for me because I make shit up in my head all the time. and I do them as theories. But honestly, I don't want to. I want you to tell the story, and I want you to tell it with the next level kind of depth where I don't have questions at the end of it. That would be brilliant. Imagine a Final Fantasy where you're not really left with that many questions. What happened to him? Why did he do that? Could they not have done this? Why did that happen? Why did they go there? I think that would be the perfect thing. I think that is what is going to give us Final Fantasy fans, with Final Fantasy 16, a sense of fulfillment, a sense of enjoyment, if you have the story fully fleshed out. I think that should be priority number one. But as number two, and this is just a personal preference, I'm telling you, just do it. Make the Final Fantasy protagonist a villain. I've said this, guys. Remember when Noctis's eyes were turning red and you had those, crazy out there complex time paradoxes and dark voids and dark crystals and a goddess of death, and there was some really cool out there stuff, and we like that with Final Fantasy. But what really excited fans was when Noctis his eyes turned red and he turned to Chaos Noctis, and there was this whole idea that the Lucis family were going to be a mafia family, and nothing is either good or bad, just thinking makes it so. And in Type 0, who you think is the villain isn't really the villain, and then at some point you begin to realise, oh, am I the villain? And I'm thinking at this point, and that's what we like about Caius Ballard, because you think he's the villain, but then you start to see a more relatable side, and then you start to wonder who is the villain. And then it was the same with Arden. And people like that. That's what I definitely want to add. And this might just be a personal thing. Make this the thing that redefines what a villain is. Make it from his point of view. And make it so well set that you don't even identify until the end that you were the villain the entire time. And imagine that. Imagine that. 'Cause that's the thing with villains. Villains never do things and then just go, oh, I realise I'm the villain. I'm the villain. They think that what they're doing from start to end is heroic, or they think it's justified, and then make it so that we essentially perhaps even destroy the world, or we cause it, or we even have to be stopped. And then it makes us reflect, I just did that and I caused this. And I really wanted to have that kind of intricacy and that kind of complexity and maturity to it. I think that's actually what I've identified most about Final Fantasy fans, is we are aging. 2009 was the last time we had a mainline title, FF13. I think we're either all in our mid-20s or 30s. Perhaps some of us are pushing it even up to 40 now. Old ugly motherfuckers. I think a lot of the fan base has matured, and I think a lot of us would like to see a story that reflected that. And I'm not saying this in a way that 15 didn't, because 15 was a very mature title and it touched on it. But honestly, go one step further, Square Enix. With Final Fantasy 16, go one step further. But let me know what you think in the comment section below. Until the next video, keep on!